We didn't have much to do. Not in Cairo, Georgia, anyway. That's Cairo pronounced with a K. Cairo. Not like the one in Egypt. Instead of pyramids, we had our beloved Cairo High syrup makers. Besides those Friday night lights, we didn't have jack shit. Just an old theater and a downtown museum. Not much us 12-year-olds could do, even this close to Halloween. After all, I was in that awkward life cycle. Too old to trick-or-treat, but too young to get shit-faced in ugly costumes. Trapped between heaven and hell. Like juvenile prisoners, my friends and I reported to Washington Middle every day. Then on the weekends, us 12-year-olds ran wild in the small city limits, entertaining ourselves as best we could. There was me, Bryson. I was chubby back then, far from tall, far from the man I'd become, but I was still a handsome kid with light hair and a friendly laugh. Of course, not until 10th grade did I shed the baby fat and start dating girls. In middle school, I just watched football and R-rated comedies, not to mention raising hell with my best friend, Blake. Blake was a scrawnier version of me, maybe the stupider version as well. I may have been country, but Blake was well on his way to becoming a pure Cairo redneck, aside from the messy black hair and loud southern voice. Blake was also more outgoing than me, the leader in our two-man army. As a couple of small-time delinquents, we did most of our damage at school. Washington Middle, a dumping ground for our wild antics. Mr. Haskell, our English teacher, particularly hated us. He was a writer who never wanted to teach, and Brad Haskell called us out in every single class, always with his dark sense of humor. Needless to say, he was a horror writer, and honestly, he was our favorite teacher for being wacky rather than strict. But like robbers getting more confident with each heist, Blake and I's enterprise soon extended beyond our shitty education. When Mom and Dad dropped me off at the theater, my Friday nights went from cheap horror movies to pot and running wild downtown. Blake and I would walk through cemeteries, make prank calls. Together, we'd turn Broad Street into a ding-dong ditch dungeon. And Halloween was the perfect time for us. The fresh autumn air gave us fuel for our endless energy. The scary decorations a beautiful backdrop for our asshole antics. There were always fun things to do. Whether it was the hayrides or haunted houses in Colquitt and Stanwyck, the local thrills and chills gave us a reliable high. A Halloween high that dominated our Octobers. But there was one Cairo legend we hadn't quite explored yet. One dare we'd never confronted. Yeah, we'd been to Miss Gacy's abandoned farm. At midnight, we'd trespassed onto the Holton Street Slave Cemetery. But throughout our friendship, Blake and I had never gone to Clive Burke's house. Mr. Burke was a small-town weirdo. Like a haunted castle, his 2-story brick house stood alone in the back of a large lot. The tall trees and high grass formed a fence for his eerie fortress. Clive's house surrounded by only a graveyard of abandoned lots and stores. And for the last 40 years, he lived all alone. Burke's home represented the final spot on our Cairo checklist. Out of all the haunted hotspots, abandoned locations, and weird areas, Burke's was all we had left. And during October, the house was especially notable for its Halloween decorations. There were the tall scarecrows in his trees, the rubber bats by the mailbox, handmade wooden mummies and werewolves lining up and down his dirt driveway. And above all, he had an abundance of glowing jack-o'-lanterns surrounding his home. From the front porch to the windowsills, jack-o'-lanterns lit all night and day, all year. Not once did Mr. Burke take those decorations down, and no one ever asked him why he left them up. Everyone too scared to go out to his yard. And when Halloween rolled around, the decorations only got scarier. Our parents always gave us the lecture on Clive Burke. He wasn't the boogeyman, just an eccentric older guy, a wacky, fruity artist from Colquitt. He hadn't left Cairo in 40 years, or left his inheritance. Burke's old family home was now his tomb. We were told Mr. Burke was in his 60s, that he had long, stringy black hair and wore baggy dark clothes. Burke was tall, eccentric, his intense hazel eyes complemented by stark white teeth. But Blake and I didn't know for sure. After all, we never saw him. Not once did Clive leave that house. Everyone said that Mr. Burke was harmless, but those decorations still freaked us out, especially the pumpkins. From afar, they lurked like hovering orbs off in the distance, and they looked so much brighter in the fall, so much more alive. Their glares were harsh, and their smiles carved wide open to scream with mocking laughter. But tonight would be different. Blake and I would finally visit the old Burke house, and on Friday, Blake and I met at the Cairo theater, our alibi perfect. Stay late watching the new Kevin Hart movie before walking back to Blake's mama's house. We were alone and had the night to ourselves. Both of us dressed in our standard gear of jeans, Aeropostale tees, and skinny hoodies. Here it was, the second week of October, and Blake and I were all set to kick off the Halloween festivities. A quick game of ding-dong ditch with one of Cairo's weirdest residents. This was our biggest challenge yet. Confidence pulsated through Blake and I. We'd even managed to get a few 8th grade girls' numbers. Got a chance to smoke a cigarette in the high school campfire of parked pickups right outside the theater. We felt like hot shit, and felt even hotter once we snuck out the back exit. The strong wind no chance against our rising excitement. Holding our cell phones, we strolled down the city sidewalks. Under the darkness and dim streetlights, we walked past Broad Street's empty stores, past the smiling witches, the cackling inflatable ghosts. Blake and I's playful banter and forced chuckles were a weak way to feign toughness, especially the further we got, the more isolated we got, and especially once the sea of shacks and derelict buildings gave way to Mr. Burke's cryptic castle.
"Oh shit,"
Blake's high-pitched southern accent squealed. He pulled me to the edge of the dirt driveway, the mailbox more dilapidated than a neglected tombstone. Already, I felt waves of unease. The bitter wind whisked through my soul, and Blake and I were just getting started.
"Come on, Bryson,"
Blake shouted, no hint of caution anywhere in his voice or demeanor. Not for us 12-year-old troublemakers. "I am," my own high-pitched voice shouted back. Blake stopped in the middle of the driveway. We stood in darkness, nothing guiding us except our phones and Mr. Burke's field of Halloween decorations. The glowing creatures and mini jack-o'-lanterns looked brighter than ever, their smiles wider, all of them seeming to stare right at Blake and I. The mummies, the scarecrows, and the pumpkins all watched us, as if they were part of Mr. Burke's personal scary security team. And through my anxiety, I realized the yard was their permanent station. They were always here. Playful, Blake punched my shoulder.
"Hey, you're going with me, right?"
I stared into Blake's wild eyes. He shook from excitement rather than the chilling weather.
"Don't bitch out, Bryson,"
he added. Nodding, I pulled my hoodie in tighter. "Yeah," I said, trying to stave off my stutter. "I just don't want to get caught." Blake cackled with glee, the exuberance of a career middle school crook well on display.
"Hell nah, we ain't."
He punched my shoulder again.
"Let's get his ass."
With that, Blake took off, and I let him lead the way. Our feet waded through tall grass, scrunched huge leaves. All I could hear was a howling wind, Mr. Burke's black and orange wind chimes, and my own beating heart. Up above, scarecrows glared down upon us like gargoyles. This close, I now saw how big they were. Life-size scarecrows, some in modern t-shirts, some in old suits and dresses, their handmade hats made of sharp straw. None of the guardians looked very friendly. These weren't the hayride strawmen from downtown Cairo. These scarecrows were the guards of a cornfield from hell. The late-night breeze gave the other decorations literal life. The mummies, the witches and zombies, even Dracula. Their slow movements made for an eerie taunt, and they still watched us as we made our way to the front porch. Sticking his arm out, Blake stopped us a few feet from the door. There were no lights, nothing except the insane arrangement of jack-o'-lanterns. Big jack-o'-lanterns positioned all around the house, on every windowsill. Together they provided enough candlelight for a cult ceremony. Faded black paint covered the porch and its rickety steps. Rather than rocking chairs, there were 2 more scarecrows positioned by the tall red door. The pair dressed like an elderly couple, complete with raggedy farm clothes and straw hats, straight out of the Great Depression. Cute by day, creepy by night. The windows around the door revealed another row of those jack-o'-lanterns. Blake and I were greeted by the same crooked smiles and carved eyes. They were our terrifying audience for the night, and witnesses for the stupid crime we were about to commit. Desperate to avoid the glowing glares, I looked over at the red door, over at the entrance to Halloween Hell. Next to it, a small doorbell awaited us, as did whatever lurked inside Mr. Burke's house. Another chill ran down my spine. The wind chime's slow chorus made me scan the yard once more, at all the creatures of the night. They were still watching us, and somehow the decorations seemed closer. I felt Blake's harsh tug grab my arm.
Let's go, bitch.
Nervous, I pulled away from him. No, I muttered. Blake confronted me, his anger offset by a childish playfulness.
Come on, Bryson.
Nah, I think we should go, I said. Annoyed, Blake tilted his head back.
Whatever.
Trying to stay on Blake's good side, I reached toward him. Let's wait and do it tomorrow. Chuckling, Blake approached the porch.
Nah, I ain't no chicken shit.
I started to follow him. Blake,
Just stay there, chicken shit.
Blake teased. Like a defeated soldier, I stopped by the front porch, surrounded by sinister scarecrows and monsters, surrounded by nothing but the autumn cold and my own chills. I folded my arms. The nerves ate me alive.
Hey, watch this. Watch this, Bryson,
Blake said. Struggling to battle the breeze, I faced Blake. His boyish grin shined through the dread, as did his rebellious spirit. The wind chimes behind me roared through the night. The wind only grew heavier, but my eyes stayed glued to the sight before me, toward Blake. With mischievous malevolence, Blake crept up the creaking porch, right past the towering scarecrows.
Watch me, bitch.
He hollered out, his southern scream and ferocious footsteps the only sounds through the silence. Cautious, I took another step, my curiosity a catalyst for my spectating. The old scarecrow couple stared straight at me, straight into my soul. Blake, I whispered. Giggling, Blake reached toward the doorbell.
I got you.
He struggled to whisper. Blake, I cried. Through the worry, I placed one foot on the stairs, letting the step groan beneath me. And then the loud doorbell erupted, an orchestral ring. Displaying a wicked grin, Blake faced me, his smile wider than ever, his eyes wilder than ever.
Let's go,
He yelled. Like a wild animal descending upon helpless prey, the male scarecrow reached out. Their movements stilted, their face stilted, and their grip vicious. My heart sank. My chills turned crippling. Within seconds, the scarecrow wrapped their wiry arms around Blake. Blake's cries a shrill siren no one would ever hear.
Bryson,
Blake yelled in desperation.
help me.
But I stayed frozen in fear, more helpless than an elderly ding-dong ditch victim. Trapped in the scarecrow's grip, Blake struggled to break free, his ferocious squirms useless.
Bryson!
He screamed. The door creaked open. Bright light from inside blinded me, the candlelight so immense. So many more jack-o'-lanterns waited inside. From what I saw, the sneering pumpkins populated the whole house, and together they threw a spotlight on the scarecrow, on the tall, lanky figure, the dark cobwebs of hair dangling from under his straw hat, his eyes even darker, his smile so cryptic and white. Sure, I'd never seen the man. I'd only heard about him. Mr. Burke, nothing more than a figment of Blake and I's wild imagination. Almost a Cairo myth. Only right now, Clive Burke was a terrifying reality. And within seconds, he dragged my best friend inside the house. Mr. Burke never said a word, his steps quick and precise, even as Blake's screams swirled through the night, up until the door slammed shut behind them. Simultaneously awestruck and horrified, I staggered forward. "Blake!" I cried. Like knives, the wind pierced through me as I ran up the porch stairs. The candles illuminated my heightened fear. I turned the locked knob, banged on the heavy door, but I got nothing, only silence. "Blake!" I screamed. Frightened, I looked all around me, but I was alone with Mr. Burke's scarecrow wife. Her gaunt gaze was fixated on me, and so were all those jack-o'-lanterns. Their grins horrified me, their collective fire blinding. Their triangular eyes further fueled my panic, their eyes of many colors. Now closer, I faced the windows and got a good look at the inside of the house, at every single spot in Mr. Burke's homemade pumpkin patch. What I saw wasn't orange, nor were there any loose seeds or hollow yellow guts. These were human heads, rows and rows of them. The more moldy pumpkins, nothing more than rotten flesh. Their horrified eyes and screaming expressions made all the more ghoulish by Mr. Burke's carving and craftsmanship. The only signs of life in each of them, a flickering candle shoved deep into their excavated skulls. These weren't just innocent decorations. Together, they formed a corpse collection Mr. Burke had spent decades cultivating. Clumsy with fear, I stumbled away, straight into the old woman's scarecrow. Instead of brisk softness, I collided into a cold cadaver. I felt the woman's bony hands press against me. I could see her purple dress sticking to a decaying body. The stench so awful. Yelling, I jumped out of her dead grasp, and then the woman's entire head tumbled off. The burlap sack of straw landed at my feet, the only part of her body that was actually a scarecrow. My horrified eyes stared on at the severed neck, at the dry blood drenching the dress collar. Like more decorations, live spiders and worms burrowed deeper into the neck gore, desperately seeking shelter after losing their roof. Shivering, I felt tears well up. I couldn't utter a scream, not even a horrified whisper. My gaze darted throughout the yard, toward all those other scarecrows, all the other victims. An agonizing creak pierced through my panic. I whirled around, and in eerie slow motion, the red door swung all the way open. Now even more light hit me, the brightest, biggest candle yet. My trembling gave way to an avalanche of tears. My soul went still. Fear latched onto me. And there, my best friend's terrified expression stared back at me. Not even the fresh slices could conceal Blake's scream, nor his eyes wide open in pain. Placed right in the doorway, Blake's severed head was Mr. Burke's scariest Halloween decoration yet. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Send your story or creepypasta to the email in the description. My shirts, Patreon, Instagram, and Twitter are down there too. Anything you do to help support the channel is much appreciated. Likes and up. So I did another one by my buddy Rhonnie Fordham. That's RHONNIE 14. The number's 14. If you want to find him on Reddit. And I'm sure I'll be doing another one of his soon. So I gotta wrap this up. I'm gonna go carve a pumpkin. And I'm gonna be doing a couple collabs. Well, I know one for sure. So that'll be cool. So, stay tuned. And be good to animals, even people. See ya.
Ja, snälla, Bergsbes, Hörs.
I turned the locked knob. I turned the knocked lob. Fuck. I turned the knocked lob. Fuck. And so were all those. Ripley, let me finish this story.